Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the first episode of the How To series, where I bring Houdini artists and educators to the channel and we talk about different topics. So, our first session is about programming and how to get into the mindset of programming, how to think like a programmer. So, our guest today is David Torno. If you don't know David, he's a visual effects artist. He's worked as a technical director, as a consultant, and at the moment he's working as a Houdini educator. He has a lot of courses, a lot of tutorials. If you check out his website, fenderfx.com, you can go to the tutorial section or utilities, check out all his awesome stuff. He has a lot of tutorials. You can go to his Vimeo channel. He has a lot of videos there as well. Or you can go to houdini.school. At the moment of this recording, he has 3 courses available there: surface advection, forces, and noise. I actually attended this course, and it was really awesome. He talks about noises, he talks about layering them in VOPs, using VEX, using PDG, and even using Python. If you are interested in any of these topics, I would recommend enrolling in his course. And you can also check out Houdini School's Discord server. David is always present. He's always answering questions there. A lot of students ask questions in the channels, and he's just answering them left and right. He's very active there, and you can learn quite a lot from him. So on to our session. We're going to talk about a lot of different topics, but mainly they're all going to be centered around programming. Now we talk about VEX, we talk about Hscript, we talk about mathematics, how to learn them, how to get into the mindset, how to actually use them in your general workflow, how to start understanding some of the topics, which even today it's quite struggling for a lot of artists. And we also talk about some random stuff as well. We talk about chops, we talk about cops, what we want to see in the next versions of Houdini. We complain about some of the crashes and bugs that we've been getting. And I hope you guys enjoy this session. I really love doing this. I would love to have more artists on the channel, doing guest tutorials, doing interviews. So let me know in the chat, in the comments, if you're interested in any other topics, and we can bring other artists to the channel. Enjoy this video, guys.
So talking about mindset, our today's topic is the programming mindset. So we talked in depth about photography, about how to do something like in real life. But coming from a technical background, what do you really need for getting into programming? What do you really do there?
I mean, it's an interesting process. So, my background was creative. It was artistic. It was not mathematical at all. It was not programmer-esque in that particular mindset where you start thinking logically. I mean, in life, you kind of naturally have a logic built into your life. I mean, if you think about the general concepts of you wanting to go to the grocery store to get some groceries, and there's a series of things that take place before that can happen. You getting up in the morning, getting dressed, taking a shower, getting your keys, walking out the door. All of these are a series of steps to get to that end goal. And that kind of process exists in the back of your mind. But if you really bring it to the front and break it down like that, keep things super simple to these minuscule tasks, that literally is what programming is kind of doing. I mean, you're laying out a series of tasks, one after another, step 1, 2, 3, 4, to then create said result or reach said goal of what you're trying to accomplish. And that's been the mindset. Like, getting into that for me was a little more straightforward because I'm highly technical and I've always spent my life deconstructing things around me. So I'll be staring at, a cup while I'm drinking it and the water swirling around and looking at the movement. And I'll be looking at details and all of this. Like, my brain was just kind of tuned into that. But I would say, just all of us in general as a human being, we've learned how to do things step by step. It's just, it was at such an early age that it's second nature now. We don't even think about it because it's just known, and it's muscle reflex. We just kind of do all of these things and don't really think about it. And I think that's the biggest difference, is looking at the details, is paying attention to each sub breakdown of the process. And doing that actually is a great idea for programming, in the keeping that mindset, because in the end of the day, the computer is only going to be as smart as the human that built it. It is really what it boils down to. And if you're doing coding like Python or Vex or whatever, you're creating a mini program is what you're doing. So it's only going to do what you tell it to do, and and nothing beyond that, really. So I think that's part of the mindset. It's just being able to break things down into simple, basic, steps is really what it is.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So
I had started like with Adobe After Effects as one example, and getting into what was it's ExtendScript, but it's based on JavaScript as the actual like coding language. And JavaScript, I think, was more known for like web, type of stuff, and still is to this day with HTML5, I think is what they're using. But that's how I got into it, was through that. It was a backdoor thing. I didn't start with programming. I was doing the creative. I was doing compositing and rotoscoping and all of that stuff. And for me, I just saw it as an opportunity. When I saw what could be done with it, I saw it as an opportunity to take care of these repetitive tasks that were driving me mad and taking me away from the actual work that needed to be done, the creative, or even being able to deliver on time, kind of a thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like kind of breaking down all these sort of formulas and stuff that you do in real life. If you're like going for shopping, you can just break it down quite a lot. You can say, move this muscle first and then move that muscle first. Yeah. So
and that's the thing, is how detailed do you break it down? There is the generalization, like I was saying, of get dressed, go out the door.
Probably we can look at it as functions. Yeah, we can probably look at this. Yeah, and like that full detailed one as like machine language, ones and zeros, basically, I think. So yeah, it becomes really interesting just comparing this. I think I saw this sort of example in Daniel Schiffman's one of his videos. Yeah. Am I saying his name right? Was it Daniel? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Daniel Schiffman.
Yeah. So
processing is, I think, the one he's known for mostly. But
yeah. I was actually watching his course. I don't know what happened. I kind of stopped in the middle, but it is something that I really want to get back into because it seemed quite interesting for me. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really good at teaching the concepts. Of programming, and he gets deep into like all of the different languages and whatnot. I was looking at some of his stuff recently for noise, just to see the breakdown of like Perlin and simplex noise and stuff like that. But yeah, his energy is ridiculous.
Yeah,
highly energetic.
Yeah, I just looking at him. Yeah, I feel like, oh man, this man is just so happy, so happy with his life. Yeah, it's awesome.
No, and it makes it, I think it makes it that much more approachable.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of people are scared by programming. It's a very off-putting thing because you think immediately, oh, I need to know math, I need to know trigonometry and all of this stuff. And yes, that helps. But of all people, myself, I can attest that I didn't have any of that knowledge whatsoever coming into it. I was, I hate to admit it, but I was not a A+ student in school when it came to math by any means. My focus was on art because I was the one that would say, when am I ever going to use math? I'm an artist. Well,
same here.
Here I am, 20 some odd years later, and I'm knee deep into it. I'm just full on math, but it's definitely learnable even after the fact if you took that same path. But
yeah, that's honestly what I'm doing right now, and I'm quite struggling just learning basics of mathematics because I used to be good at it. I wasn't even bad. Like it was going great. But I finished high school, and then I was like, okay, I got into architecture. So I went to get my bachelor's degree in architecture, and we really didn't use any mathematics there. It's not really a concept. It's not important. So yeah, I kind of forgot all of it. And right now I'm relearning matrix. And it has become hard because back then
I'm still struggling with matrix myself. Yeah,
it's just terrible. Like I understand the math itself, it's fine. Like I can follow on that, but again, getting into the mindset of actually using it, like remembering when I'm using. Let me give you an example. It's kind of funny because back when I started, I was working with like doing hair simulations and stuff like that. And I wasn't really, I didn't want to watch like a tutorial for that one. I was just kind of struggling. I said, okay, let me put down a pop net. I'm going to use the particles and then I'm going to trail them. And let me think what I can do if I want to add like a motion to the hair, for example. And thinking to myself that I came up with a great solution. I thought about the curve view attribute, which was something that I just learned a couple of weeks ago. And I said, yeah, let's do a group expression and select the one that has a curve view of 0. And after I was finished, I was so proud of myself. And the thought that came to my mind, I wonder if anyone thought about this. That was what I thought. And then after a second, I was like, yeah, clearly they thought about this. This is not something that I came up with. Someone that's been using Houdini for 2 weeks.
Similar moments like that where, it's that joy of self-discovery of being able to find that solution on your own without like digging too much into like Googling every possible answer. And it's a great feeling. It really is. And, and I look at it that even, odds are somebody has already figured that out, and it's been known probably for the last decade or two. It's like, hey, I figured it out. This is awesome. It's that discovery moment of like, I've learned something. I have actually progressed in doing what I wanted to do. I set out to hit this goal, and I've hit it. And I think that's still a good feeling to have, because that just makes it that much more encourageable.
Yeah, exactly.
Motivation-wise to like keep going, and I've hit, I think, like going back to the matrices thing, I'm still struggling with the matrices, like understanding the concepts of what they are. I understand the whole like 3x3, 4x4 scale, transform, rotation. I understand what data is there. The hardest part for me right now is translating that into an actual implementation of how on my own trying to like apply that directly in Houdini. And I've had a number of conversations. I've had Adam Swab, who graciously was nice enough to even share a build with me that shows matrices used in a transformation effect I was trying to do, where I was trying to basically reassemble an RBD sim of like the pieces came out and then they were going to reassemble back into its shape, kind of a thing. And he sent me a fully functional working thing. And I've looked through it a number of times. I'm able to replicate his build, but I'm still unable to actually apply that in my own concepts when I'm building something else. And it just hasn't clicked yet for me. And it will eventually. But for those types of difficult hurdles, I've resigned to the fact that, okay, I'm not getting it now. That's okay. I will get that at some point later. Maybe I have to do this 20 times. Maybe I have to do it 100 times. Maybe it just has to be presented in a slightly different form for it to click with me. And I think that's been one of the biggest like pushes for me to, when I'm teaching and talking about coding or even just Houdini in general, I keep trying to do it from a creative artistic perspective and a non-technical. I mean, the technical's there and it's deep, but I try to take that approach of trying to simplify the complex concepts, at least the ones I understand, to make that more understandable. It's sometimes the literal mathematical approach of this is how it's done doesn't make sense to a lot of people. It really doesn't. It doesn't always click. So sometimes association, that's a big thing for me, like the whole car and driving thing. Like everybody's familiar with these concepts and they understand that there's things involved with that. So associating to something that is relatable is been a big thing in like learning a lot of these kind of steps. And yeah, like trying to get back in the matrices, I need to find an explanation that's in a process that clicks with me. And it's just, I'll find it eventually. And once I do, then I'll share it in my way of understanding it to everybody else. And hopefully that'll,
yeah, please do that, because I think a lot of people, including myself, are struggling with matrices. Yeah, to me, it's the same. Like I can use anything I see, I can use it, I can replicate it, but that's not really like understanding it. I can copy it, I can put it there, it functions, I can even change it, like add some stuff to it, but I really can't build it. It's just doesn't come to me. At best, I can be like, okay, I feel like I'm gonna need that, so I'm just gonna do a ton of research, see if anyone has encountered a problem like this, which I think a lot of people in programming also do this, like Google their problems, which I think it's really good. It helps a lot. Just encountering a problem, and just finding other people that had this problem, kind of trying to replicate their setups.
It's definitely, I would call it a collaborative effort of sorts, but via searches. Somebody who has encountered it before and has either presented a solution or is working through it, and part of what they've discovered helps spark an idea for you to then take it to the next step and so forth, and it kind of like ping pongs until a solution is actually found, kind of a thing. But that's like, I think one thing to kind of keep in mind, like with learning programming, is I don't think there's a single programmer. I'm pretty sure this is safe in saying that there's not a single programmer out there that knows 100% of the code that is going to be used, in a process that they're building. There's always going to be a moment where you're going to be searching some optimized layout or a specific function that's going to do the task that you're trying to accomplish. You may be building it from scratch by hand, and all of a sudden you'll find later on there's a pre-built function that's native to the language that will actually accomplish the same thing or something close to it.
There's like a library that you can just add, and it takes care of.
Somebody's got a function or a library or some framework that's out there, and it is a lot of searching, and there really isn't one location for a lot of the stuff. I mean, it depends on the language, it depends on the community that's supporting that language and so forth. And like you get into something like Python, for example, it is so vast. It is like, it's in everything. You can do stuff standalone, all within a small little kind of environment. You can do stuff specifically for applications. You can do stuff that are scientific. You can do stuff that are creative. It's like got its hands in everything. And I think in some respects makes it a little more complicated to kind of understand what you're researching, because it could be related, it could not be related, even though it's the same coding language. And it gets a little tricky, because even Python implemented into the softwares like Houdini and Cinema 4D and Maya and all of these other apps, the core, and I'll go through some of these little basic details in a moment too, is the core of it is the same across the board for the language, but then you have the app specific kind of functions and methods that are associated with that application. And Houdini as an example would be, you're dealing with points and primitives and so forth. So you're going to have functions that are related to that specific topic that won't exist in Python in general, because that's just unrelated and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in some parts. But yeah, there are app specific stuff, but the basics I've found, even though I've only dealt with ExtendScript, JavaScript, Python, and Vex at this point in my life. I dabbled with C++. I tried to dive into it and did not get far. I failed miserably because of outdated tutorial versus the app I was using and so forth. And it just became too complicated for me and wanting to deal with it. So I've stuck to the scripting languages because at least I can associate stuff. If I know the application, I know what they're trying to accomplish. So I see relatable functions. So it's easier to pick up for me. So doing automation type stuff or UI building type stuff It's like, okay, I can immediately kind of grasp how to kind of build something like this. But the languages across the board, understanding how to just declare and create variables, how to do a simple statement, a comparative statement, like an if statement, how to do loops, a for loop, a while loop, a do while, stuff like that. Those three kind of core concepts are universal across the board. The syntax and how they're written, the specifics of how they have to be written for the language will vary, but the ideas and concepts are exactly the same. You know, an if statement's going to be comparative. You're going to compare A to B to basically determine whether or not you're going to do something. You know, if it's raining, do I go outside? If it's not raining, do I go outside? It's basically, you know, this simple on-off switch of sorts that you're checking with. And then, you know, getting that core down already takes you about 80% of the way there with just understanding the basics of any language. But then you get into those specifics of the functions and so forth. And that's where it gets more complicated of how you connect those, how you kind of daisy chain each step to then create your final process. But yeah, I would say variables, if statements, or just comparative statements in general, and for loops are like, learn those first. As long as you get that basic concept down, that's a good starting point for any language to begin with, because you're always going to compare, you're always going to batch when I have to do stuff, which will involve a loop of some kind.
Yeah, definitely. Like the first time I was able to figure out a loop on my own, I remember I was like, okay, I'm kind of understanding what's going on right now. I feel like I can build on top of it, get things done. I used to struggle with loops actually quite a lot because I got confused about where to use them. It wasn't how to use them. It's not that hard to use them. You're like, you declare like an integer I plus plus, something like that. But when do I need this? Like, what's the difference between this loop or the one we have actually in Houdini, like the SOP loop, which goes through the geometry, and then you have like all these other options. And like personally for me, what really clicked it was actually using it and like really spending a lot of time just getting stuck there, not understanding what to do, and then finally understanding, like even paying attention to the names, especially for the ones that we have in SOPs. That really helps because, like, okay, named primitive, for example, so you need a name attribute, then it's going to function on the primitive, so the name should be on the primitive, and then kind of building it from there. Connectivity, okay, so they're going to be connected. Like, I've been working on a tool recently. I don't know if you saw the tutorial on Houdini School's Discord. I've been working with variants quite a lot recently. And I am going to release that. I'm just kind of putting my tool under a lot of stress right now in production, just kind of testing it, making sure everything works. And I'm glad I didn't release it because I encountered a bug and I fixed it, which was great. And I had to use Vex for that. I couldn't figure it out how to do it without Vex. And my Vex is extremely dirty. I am not proud of it, but it's working. So I'm just happy.
That's all that matters. If it functions, it functions. That's,
yeah.
You know, again, the final result. With like coding loops, say in Vex, Python, or whatnot, versus the SOP for loops, the general concept is that you're going to repeat a task. You're going to be kind of going through more than one item, one after another, and there's similar kind of concepts, like the iteration would be one part of it. So like when you're doing the coding loop, like you're saying the integer I is equal to 0, and then you're checking to see if I is less than whatever length, which is going to determine how many loops you end up doing. And then you iterate that number up. So each time I is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and so forth as it goes through. And in the SOP for loops, you've got like that metadata node that you can add after the fact that carries that data. There's an iterations actual attribute that's in there. So it's presented in a different form, but the information's still there. So that concept's still the same. It's just visually laid out different. You know, we've got a vertical kind of system where everything's stacked in between, which is similar to like regular kind of coding, versus if you do a for loop, like say in VOPs, where everything is horizontal.
Which is just weird. It doesn't work.
Weird.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's a, why,
Terrible.
what I don't understand is, I guess because of how VOPs is built. So like standard SOPs, you've got, 1 to 4 inputs, sometimes a few more, but that's kind of your average. There's an input, there's an output. On VOPs, you are now kind of getting micromanaging because you're now connecting parameters versus actual just global input outputs. You're not saying this data comes in and then it goes out. You're saying this specific data comes in and goes into another specific data. And I think that's where the complication comes in, because now the for loop has to account for all of that in VOPs. And that's why it got so convoluted, because you now have to connect every single line. And for a visual person, I can see this being simpler, because you see, where it's coming from, where it's going, kind of a thing. But from a coding perspective, or even efficiency for that matter, it's so much faster to just type in
definitely.
for, and then the open and close brackets, and then everything's kind of like done for you in some respects. But yeah, it's like I was mentioning before we were starting all of this, I did a VEX setup, and I was going to show the comparative VOP version of that. 5 minutes after trying to hook up a for loop, I was like, forget it. This is
I'm done.
How many?
This is actually, it's not going to be even helpful for a student. Even as a visual person myself, it's really simpler to understand one line of code compared to like all these crazy lines coming in, and then you have to follow them to find where they're coming from, and then they might be like the whole thing there. I tried
the spaghetti bowl lines, that's where it gets crazy.
Yeah, it's terrible. I tried to create a very simple group with an if statement in VOPs. I was just trying to, I was curious. I never use VOPs for that, but I just tried to see that, and even that was complicated. Like it seemed unnecessary, because then you're binding it out, but then you name it group, underline something, and like the whole connection was weird. In VEX, you just literally say if something. You don't even have to use like curly brackets. If it's just one line, you can just write it after it.
The inline if statements. Yeah, those are super helpful.
Yeah, a lifesaver. You just write it in a line, and you're done. You don't even need the curly brackets. I mean, the curly brackets are never really the problem, but they're not really complicating things.
In my mind, I break it down too, of like how many steps does it take to accomplish the final result. And when you're doing it in VEX, it's like, okay, I can make this happen in like 4 lines of code. I am typing 4 lines of text is all I'm doing. I can do that so much faster than trying to tab, grab a node, type that in, drop that down, connect the input, find out that I wasn't zoomed in far enough, so I connected the wrong input, so I have to zoom it in.
I always connect V instead of P. I always connect V.
It's for me, it's just more of a clumsy kind of system, whereas I'm just in a simple little window and I can type in the text, and for me that works. And I get not everybody can click and do that as simply, because you do still have to know the code. You still have to know what the text means and how it interacts, and some of the requirements for some of it as well. But again, once you get those base concepts down, it becomes way much easier. It really does. And kind of like a side note, a conversation I was having on the Facebook Houdini group, somebody was putting up a meme about how difficult it is learning code and just to use Houdini. So it's been this back and forth conversation with a lot of people, showing their sides and their random comments of, you should do this, you should do that, kind of a thing. And I was kind of pointing in there about it being mindsets. It's just a mindset thing of, some people are visual. An artist traditionally is going to be visual, and having nodes is perfect for that. You can see what's happening. You've got, a set amount of options, so you can connect A to B, or A to Z, or whatever option is going to be in there. and you've got parameters that are pre-built. So you know that, okay, this control is going to make this bigger, or this control is going to make it choppier. You know, there's going to be options that are kind of laid out. So you kind of have this, like a multiple choice test of sorts, where you've got options to choose from, and you know one of them's right. So even if you just fiddle around with them, you'll learn which one's right, you know, kind of a thing. Whereas with code, you have to know the exact output, because if it's wrong, it'll just say that it's wrong because it's expecting something else, but that expectation isn't always clear as to what it should be. And that's where, you know, knowing that it is a little more complicated. But yeah, it's, for me, it's about efficiency and bloat. There are nodes that are very useful, and there's that one aspect of that node that I like to use, and it's got 2-3 dozen other controls in there that I don't use, that I never use. And I hate having to go drop a node for that one little thing and, you know, look through the UI to find it every single time, when I can just take Vex and create the actual controller I need and connect it right up. So when I go to that node, all I have is exactly what I'm using. And for me, that I find that easier to use and just more efficient in general. So I don't have to like have this UI bloat or even processing bloat, because some nodes are heavy to process, and they're processing other aspects that you may or may not be using. So that's, you know, pros and cons to both sides. It really is. So, I mean, it absolutely is possible to use Houdini in a functional, advanced way without using code. It truly is. It's not going to look pretty at the end of the day, because you're going to have a lot of nodes, especially if
huge
you go
trees.
Yes, you're going to have massive trees. Like at that point, you better be super organized, and you're going to have network boxes all over the place, color coded, to sort it all, because visually at that point, I find that confusing. You know, I'm looking at a spaghetti bowl of like nodes, and especially if they're not color coded or anything, it's like, what am I looking at? You know, you have to start tracing lines.
I mean, honestly, going back to some of my older scene files, even I can't really figure out what I've done there, let alone if someone else needs to actually see it. So definitely color coding is really important.
Yeah, I think I've taken mine to like an OCD level. It's just, I name, I label, I color code. I've even color coded lines. Like you can put the knots. So you put the sub knot to like reroute the line or the wire to go somewhere else. If you color code the knot itself, the trailing edge, the incoming line will actually carry the same color.
Oh, interesting.
And that helps.
I didn't know that.
So you can, so like color wise, you can start differentiating some of the lines in some respects, which helps. But yeah, I mean, it's just having the forethought to do that, to put in that extra effort. And I get the pushback from a lot of people. It's like, I need a deadline. I don't have time to like do organization. They're just dropping nodes, and it's just, you know, no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 type of thing. And I had the same issue like in After Effects, when artists would give me folders that, you know, have
After Effects
gets
one, just
comp 2, comp 3,
really dirty. And naming things is really important. I can't function without naming stuff. When I'm operating Houdini, I name things. I'm not big on network boxes, because then moving them gets a little hard, but I always add my own colors. I have my default colors, which I've added there. Control click on the color, so I just know this color, this node is going to be in this particular color. I always hit Shift S. I don't like the lines. I really need like straight lines. My mind just gets confused if they're like going inside each other.
Well, it's like it cleans it up, but then when they merge at that curve point, then it's like, okay, now which line is going where?
Okay,
like that's the only time I'll toggle back to the straight lines. But
honestly, I keep just toggling when I'm actually working. I hit Shift S to actually see where they're going, but then when I'm done with this part, again Shift S just to have like the nice lines. I add like nulls everywhere, even if I'm directly connecting something like to a DOPNet, even if it's literally going like through the second one, and then inside the DOPNet, I'm saying, use the second context. I'm still putting down a null there. I don't know why. I just like having that.
There's an organizational aspect of just having it clean and tidy like that. And there's functionality behind that, because obviously coming back to that, a week later, a month later, if you're opening up an old project because a client comes back and you're trying to replicate, and God forbid you have to even update the project to a current version of Houdini, you got to know the flow of what was happening. And with programming as well as with nodes, organization is so vital. Like, in programming, you put a lot of comments. I do it a ton of times because some code, it's a few lines, you knock it out and it works and you move on. But other times, like this last class I did recently, I had one piece that I put together, was over 350 some odd lines of code. A lot of that was comments. It was just,
I remember, I was there.
This section's doing this section's doing that. If I'm in the process, like when I was building that, I didn't build that in a day. Like that took me about a week or so off and on. I wasn't like completely on it, 8 hours a day, every day kind of a thing. But as I stop down, or if I hit a hurdle, I immediately put a note that is uniform across every code that I do. And I just say left off here. And I put it in caps. It's an actual comment. And then after that, I'll put, parentheses, and then put a brief little note of what my mind was like troubleshooting, making this, fit into whatever, or trying to get this data to come out correctly. Just something to remind myself, because I'm going to step away. I'm going to let my brain kind of soak this in.
Breathe.
I'm going to go watch Netflix, go for a walk, go do something else and think about something else. And, maybe I come back to it the next day or 2 days later. And when I do, I can just do a quick search and say, find left off here. And then I immediately go straight to that line. And then I see my note and go, oh, okay, yeah, that's my reminder. I know exactly what I was doing. And now I've got a solution for it, kind of thing. Or I just trudge through trying to find another solution at that time. But yeah, organization for everything is so vital. I mean, in my opinion, it should be mandatory.
Yeah.
in any studio. Like it has to be. Coming from a background as a technical director, like I would implement systems that would kind of auto do that, because artists just didn't have a habit of doing that for the most part. They would give sloppy, unorganized projects where things were all over the place. You had no idea what was doing what. You don't even know what the final output was, which was, that kills so much time.
Yeah.
If you've ever worked in a studio where you've been handed a project from another artist and you're expected to pick up where they left off, no notes, no organization, it takes you at least a day to just get reacclimated to their system. And then you have to adjust your mindset of how to incorporate either their system or adapt your system to theirs. And that whole system, like you're down for a day or a day and a half in some cases. And that's
maybe even more, because you don't really encounter all the problems when you start. Probably every couple of days, you just get stuck for a couple of hours, just not knowing what's going on.
Yeah, you hit the next hurdle in the line. You're used to doing, like, you've got your own workflow. Everybody's got a unique workflow. And I think a lot of studios expect this kind of cog system where they just, oh, this cog is broke or missing, because we're going to swap that out, put another one in, and should be able to continue on where we left off. And that's not always the case. And I think that's a big issue in the industry as a whole. But that organization is vital. It's not only saving you, it's saving the next person in line, you know, in the next department. Definitely. Or the artist behind you. And some people are malicious about it, and some are just not good at organizing in general. They just don't do it.
Well, I understand a lot of people's minds don't really work like that organized. They don't they don't need it. I think I personally need it when I'm working. I have my own node. It's called add note. I don't like the Houdini's box for adding notes. It has like parameters where I can just add them and say, okay, I'm picking this from this particular node, just in case I want to change it. Like I know, I mean, I can use takes, for example, but then you have to like add a new take and unlock something. And it gets just too complicated. So I have like my value, I add my parameter, and then like I add values with commas just to know which seed values, for example, are working for my scene, just to be able to get to those values very easily. And then I kind of connect them together as well. So it makes it much easier to handle. I feel like things like that. I wish Houdini had some things like that. I really wish Houdini did name all their nodes when you dive inside. For example, a complicated node when you allow editing of content. I really wish they had like everything named. Some of the stuff are actually named correctly, but most of the things that are from labs, I think they're not really like named. Some of them are not even organized, like half the tree is here and then half of it is down there. So it kind of makes it complicated to go through it, because one of the things that I really like to do is like open a tool and just study how it's made, because it really helps me out. Because at the end of the day, I feel like half the nodes in Houdini, even maybe more, aren't really like necessary. You can build it up from scratch. So just learning how to do something like that is really helpful. Naming.
I think they have a lot of, the naming, and there's a lot of carryover too from version to version. You know, they're hiding stuff that are legacy that they're going to eventually just depreciate and rip out altogether. But yeah, that whole like diving in, I think with labs in itself is an experiment. You know, they're constantly just kind of creating these wild random tools that artists kind of want, or they're experimenting with trying to make a specific kind of feature that would be cool to have, kind of a thing. So I think that's probably, you know, indicative of that mindset. They're just kind of dropping things down and experimenting. And I think probably after the fact, either deleting out what wasn't used or needed in the final system and whatnot. So it's just kind of haphazardly thrown down. Versus,
I mean, don't get me wrong, the labs tool are amazing. They're my favorite tools in Houdini. That's why I have my complaint, because I really want to just understand how they made it, because some of them are really exciting. Like instead of writing a lot of code for selecting like random polygons, you have what's it called? Random selections. Yeah. Labs random selection, which is just an amazing tool. You just throw it there and it just selects randomly, which I struggled with this quite a lot. And I just stumbled across this one because I was just searching in my Houdini. I just hit tab and I was just searching random, see if there is anything. And I found this tool, and I actually figured out, after checking this, I figured out they added this literally in the previous version that I got. So it was actually pretty new. It wasn't even something that they added a long time ago, but it saved a lot of my time instead of just going through everything, trying to select things. Yeah.
Labs is really huge, definitely. Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff in there. I don't dive through it that often just because it's not natively installed by default. Like you have to actively say to install it. So like a lot of times when I was learning Houdini, it wasn't there to begin with. So I kept focusing on what was natively there. And I just kind of got used to not using labs. And then I would be finding myself building things that somebody would mention, oh yeah, there's a labs tool for that. It's like, oh, okay.
If you remember from my class, I kept saying I hate the reimage the grid. I don't like using that. I like to set up my own VTP nodes. And honestly, right now I find myself using it because it's just simpler. you just place one node. Yeah.
At a certain point, it does. Yeah, it's the convenience of things. It's like, I just don't like.
I was wrong.
And I do that like with VOPs. Like I'm big on Vex across the board just because I'm code centric. But it's like when I get into noise, it's like, I'm going straight to VOPs because it's so much simpler. Because the controls
you can add it to the color, see what's going on. Actually, you don't need to like build all these variables just to get access to something simpler. And honestly, personally, I struggle with layering noise in Vex, and I know you covered that in your class, which helped me out quite a lot. Now I have a better understanding. But before that, I was like, oh, what am I supposed to do there? It's just confusing. I layer everything in VOPs.
Because it was just when I deep dived into that, doing the coding for that, I started encountering random things like that, where it was like, okay, some of these noises produce an actual result, so you can assign them to a variable, but other noises actually assign the variables within the function.
Yeah.
And I wasn't realizing that initially. And I was like, oh, because my initial mindset was like, okay, I'm going to build a noise generator. I want all of the noises. I want all of the options. So that way I can then iterate through and then see what variants can happen, at a base level. So each noise individually, and then do, say, a random setup of randomly pick a noise, take that output, feed it back in, randomly pick another noise, and continue the cycle however many times. So when I, again, broke that down simply, these are the tasks, and I went through to start building that I know I'm going to need an array because I'm going to do a loop. So I just want to have an array that has every single item in there, all of my noises. And then I'm just going to loop through that array, get the result, and move on. I couldn't do that because of how those noises were. I was like, oh, crud, I'm going to have to, like, these noises, there's like a dozen of them that don't work that way. So I can't put them in an array because I have to like create the variables, then I have to run the functions, and then I've got the data. That data can go into an array, but then I can't put the other noises in the same array. And it just became this complicated thing where I started to have to deconstructing every aspect of it. So it was broken down into like, oh, is it float or is it vector? And then that started helping. And then it's like, if it's float, is it a float that was a function-based one or a float that was just an actual return value from the noise itself? So it opened up my eyes to the noises within Vex a lot more. I could see the advantages. I definitely see what they were trying to do in this, where you have deep base level access. So you've got, you know, the Perlin noise and simplex and all of that, but at the core level, so you could build your own noise from scratch, which is kind of the concept behind Vex, is being able to control and build everything. And when you do it that way, it definitely gets more complicated in that concept because noises get very convoluted the way they stack and feed into each other to accomplish, say, like a curl noise or something that we're kind of used to using, like in VOPs, you know, a basic, like a turbulent
anti-alias noise, my
yeah,
favorite.
Yeah, anti-alias noise. Like, you know, because you'll see in VOPs, those drop downs have other like noise types, you know, alligator and simplex and all of that stuff. And when you realize that those base ones like that is kind of the foundation, you know, everything's on Perlin or it's on Worley as a foundation, and then they built upon that, and then, you know, you vary the source. It's like, oh, yeah, it gets really convoluted really quick, which is the primary key of trying to stay organized. You want to break things down as simply as possible so you can code them, you know, and be able to do it step by step as best as you possibly can. And when you involve arrays and loops and stuff, visually it can be a little daunting to look at because there's a lot of text there. And when you understand what an array is, it's a container, you know, think of it as a box that has divisions. You know, you've got separators inside the box. That's all it really is. You've got this container and you've put one item per little slot within the box. And that's your container, and you just want to loop through that box and loop through one by one. You know, and that's the core concept of a array and a for loop. I mean, that's all that's really doing. You just have to pay attention to the data type. You know, if you're dealing with objects like nodes or something that has sub information versus a float or vector value, which is an actual value, you know, that's the final result right there. So, but that's where you just kind of get into paying attention to data sets, you know, what the types are and such. But yeah, trying to organize that. You want to simplify it.
Yeah. First time I encountered an array, it was like really new to me because I didn't really understand what was going on. So the way I kind of wrapped my head around it, it was just saying, okay, look at a vector. A vector has 3 components. Just imagine something having more than 3. Yes. I kind of imagined a vector being an array, which I think at some point they actually are. You know, they really, yes, they're not, no, but they're.
Yeah, if you talk to a programmer, they'll say, no, it's not. Well, technically, yeah, it's multiple items within a single container. I say it's an array of sorts, you know, and, you know, because they have, so there's vector 2, vector 3, and vector 4. Those are the common setups. So 2, 3, and 4, there's 2 items, 3 items, and 4, you know, components within that. That's an array. I'm sorry. It really is.
Yeah, it is. But then it's not, but then it is, you know, it just gets weird. Yeah. And like, speaking of a vector 4, I've always, and I still do have a problem with understanding a vector 4 and the difference between a vector 4 and a matrix of 2 by 2, which at the end of the day, they still have 4 components, but they're doing something different, clearly. So yes.
So like a vector 4, so like a standard vector, we're used to X, Y, and Z, you know, as a standard coordinate system or a point, location, position. If you convert that to color, it's RGB. same thing. It's, a vector 3, but we just call it vector because it's the most common vector that we use. Vector 4 is the exact same thing. Vector 4 is just incorporating time. So you've got a position plus time, X, Y, Z plus time. And that's what the fourth component is in that particular context. From the matrix, I couldn't answer that because I'm still, again, trying to understand like every one of those concepts right there. But yeah, because I know the grid on that is it's weird. It's more of a box. It's an actual grid, I should say. So it's 2 rows and 2 columns versus a matrix, a 3x3, which is same thing, or 4x4, I think is what they have as well. But more than likely, once it does get to the 4, I think it is incorporating time in some fashion, just written differently as far as I know. But
I get confused by the orient attribute, for example, because it's a Quaternion, and then I just get lost because I do not understand what goes on there with that kind of thing. Yeah.
I was just going to say that, like, the furthest I've gotten was doing an empty matrix using ident, the ident function.
I've done that,
yeah,
and just rotating things around themselves.
Yes. So you do the.
That's the only thing I know.
The angle, and convert it to a Quaternion, and then it goes into orient. Like I memorized that part of it, but that is the furthest I have gotten.
I added that as a preset to my Rango so that I don't even have to remember it. I learned that from the In Bloom course. I don't remember who made that. But it's great.
I got that.
I've seen a lot of different versions of that course online, just people doing plants growing up, which is just amazing. But at the same time, they're using the same plant. So I'm kind of like, change that plant a little bit. But that really helped me a lot with just understanding this. But at the end, I'm just like, what's happening with this matrix? Because I just get lost there. But I don't know which one I prefer, because orient is also confusing, the orient attribute. I can't really like control the fourth component. And at first I was like, okay, maybe these are like rotations and the fourth one is just something around all of them, but it's clearly not that.
Yeah, I think it's it's the angle and axis. I think
so. Yeah.
The angle of rotation that you want, and then the actual axis that it's rotating around. So if it's on Y, then it's going across X and Z technically, and if it's on Z, then it's going the other way. And it's
it just gets weird really fast.
Simple concepts. I can understand that aspect, but again, implementing it's another story. But
this is one of the examples. I feel like the VOPs version is a little bit simpler because we have like Euler to Quaternion, and then it accepts XYZ and also a rotation. So you kind of get the idea of, okay, so the first one is going to be like our axis, and the other one is going to be the rotation itself. But then like going to Vex, these just get so confusing, at least for me.
Yeah, because again, that goes back to the having to know specifically the arguments that the function is requesting and the order in which it's requesting it. Whereas with the VOPs, at least we're given those clues as to like it's expecting this. So, okay, you can kind of deduce that this one's going to output that format and connect the two. So it definitely helps. I mean, I would say like even, using VOPs to just kind of learn some of the concepts to kind of edge your way towards Vex is kind of a good thing too.
Yeah.
Kind of get your feet wet that way.
At the same time, it gets sometimes confusing because the namings aren't similar. So you learn something in VOPs and then you just cannot find it in Vex. And usually it's actually the other way around. I learned like stuff in Vex and I try to find them in VOPs, and then I just simply can't. I can't seem to figure out which one is supposed to do that function, because I'm like, okay, I know what function is doing that, but I kind of want to figure out how to do it with VOPs as well. But then I'm just lost.
I think that's on that's on side effect for kind of lacking on the consistencies across the board, because they should unify that somewhat as best as possible. I know both of them are going to have some unique items that aren't going to exist in the other, but at least the ones that do try to at least keep them consistent across the board for that reason, because I know that like VOPs has mix, but in Vex it's LERP. So it's linear.
That was so complicated for me when I was just starting. I was like, linear interpretation, what is that? What's it doing? And then once I did the mix thing, I was like, what? This is so simple. And I struggled with that, and I had to like search what linear interpretation actually is, and it brought me to like YouTube channels where they talk about mathematics in general, and then I had to sit through something that was related to physics because they were talking about oil and how they can just like do something I don't remember, but it was really engineering, and they just mentioned linear interpretation, but it actually did help me. I understood how it's working. Yeah,
I think that's hard too, because a lot of it is scientific and mathematically related. So to like do a Google search, that's all you're going to get is something that's completely non-Houdini. Like
the Wikipedia one that comes on top, it's never working.
Get into Khan Academy, I think, is a
it's great. Yeah,
he's good at like explaining a lot of stuff over there, but the same thing. It is going to be more scientific and mathematical. So
for me, three blue, one brown, or three brown, one blue. I don't remember. Three blue, one brown.
One brown.
Three blue. Yeah, that was great. It helped me a lot with understanding the math itself. But again, I lacked the sort of vision to understand how to implement this function, because I understood matrices. They worked for me. But then how to really wrap my head around it, that is still a struggle. And other concepts as well.
Right. Yeah, there's, I think like a lot of the big concepts are going to be like calculus and trigonometry are kind of like the more common items that you'll implement within more complicated builds per se. When you start getting into power and sine and cosine and stuff like that. Some of them are simpler to remember, like sine and cosine, because I use those a lot. But they do fall into those other categories of trig and calculus, where you're trying to learn these deeper functions that are part of the overall, or the overarching equation to get whatever result that you're going to get. Where, like creating a circle path.
Yeah, that was so complicated at first when I was learning it. I was just so confused by how to just create a simple circle. I had to watch tutorials.
When you look at it, like it's, now that you know it, it's simple because it's like sine and cosine. That's all it is. But it's like, okay, because one's going this way and the other is just doing the opposite. It goes under. So combine those two humps together and you got a circle. It's just it's just weird, like how the math works out that way.
I feel like the biggest problem that everyone has is, how do you know that? Because like as someone that is just beginning their journey, they're like, well, how do you get to that point where you know this? So again, maybe even a better question: learning mathematics for Houdini, or just learning Houdini and kind of finding your way through the mathematics? Which one works better?
That's kind of tricky, because I would say like my personal route was, I knew the creative and kind of backtracked from there. I had, as far as Houdini's related, my in when I learned Houdini was through Vex. So I had already started learning a little bit of code, so I found familiar aspects in Vex that I found easier to do versus learning the actual basics of Houdini. So I was able to kind of go this weird back door to like advanced stuff, and then, stumble over the simple stuff, the basics kind of a thing. But I would say, like, overarching, if you want to take it, probably the ideal route is learn mathematics, and then you would understand these stronger concepts. I would say that they're disconnected from Houdini initially, because you could do a lot of stuff in Houdini without having to deal with the mathematics aspect of it. But if you are trying to dive deeper, in theory, I would say a lot of users are already in Houdini at this point, and they're trying to expand to these cooler looks or these other designs that they're seeing online and presented, and they're finding out, oh, that was done with math, or that was done with Vex, or it was done, not with a basic node kind of setup for the most part. So I think that the more traditional route is going to be backwards like that, where you are in Houdini already and trying to associate the math to that. And in some respects, you can dabble at that point by doing a single function and seeing its visual result. So like a sine wave, just taking a, like say you take an add point, put down a single point in Houdini, put a transform onto that point, and then simply take X, Y, or Z, it doesn't matter which one, and put sine on that actual component and see what it does. You know, you'll see it kind of ebb and flow in the direction of that axis, kind of a thing. So at least there's some kind of visual representation of what it does. And not all of the functions are going to do that, but at least there may be some kind of visual feedback that you can use to kind of like dial it in that way. But I think probably the most beneficial thing is trying to find a Houdini specific training course. I think there is a, is it math for Houdini? I think it's called, or math for VFX artists. I forget. It's
I think I've heard it. Is it from
I forget his name.
FX something?
I might have to look this up real quick. Because I know the like math in Houdini or math for VFX artists. It's been around for a while and it's been updated a number of times.
I think Rebelway has something, math for VFX artists. I found.
Rebelway does have one particular one, and oh man, it's gonna drive me nuts now because I know. Let's do Houdini. Put a different search term on there. There it is. Hossam Alden Alawi.
If you want, you can share your screen if make it easier. Yeah.
Let me pull share my screen here. Actually, I'll share my phone. You see that?
Okay. Yeah.
So math in the Houdini effects, it's meant for TDs because it's going to deal with like matrices, cross products, and dot products and stuff. This series has been around for a long time. This was posted like 5 years ago, but I know he's been doing updates to it here and there, and I think just because Houdini keeps updating and whatnot. But this is one that's geared specifically to Houdini. So at least there's going to be related aspects for this that would be helpful in the long run, especially if you're already in Houdini, you've got some relatable items that you want to kind of use it for. So that's just something to take a look at for that. And that one I've looked at that a few times over the years because I think I had originally picked up the initial release like way back when I was trying to like figure stuff out, and I've just held on to it this entire time. But
I should definitely watch that myself.
Yeah, if you're definitely wanting to get into the programming, for Houdini specific stuff, definitely try to find training series that are relatable. That's going to help, that much more versus just, going.
At least the environment is related to Houdini. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's something familiar, which won't make it quite as daunting, hopefully, because it's like, oh yeah, I understand the Vex node or a VOP node or this, parameter or whatnot. At least there's something familiar there, and versus just looking at a blackboard and equations, on a regular Khan Academy type of explanation.
That's probably why a lot of us moved into artistic areas, because we didn't really understand the blackboard version. And then kind of going a full circle, ending up at the mathematics again.
Yeah, it was literally, it was the necessity of needing the mathematics in these creative environments. And then again, having that relatable creative association to help with learning it. Because a lot of the stuff, what I know now, I'm self-taught. I mean, I'm literally looking at tutorials. I'm looking at all of this stuff, and that includes the math. It's been this incremental thing. I have struggled with it for a long time, understanding vectors and all of this stuff. And I'm looking at it now going, what did I stumble over? Because it actually is somewhat simple with basic vector math and so forth. But once I was able to associate it to something I did know, like I was the early years, it was Cinema 4D and it was After Effects. And now, nowadays it's Houdini. So it's all associated to the app that I'm using. And that made a huge difference because there's visual output of some kind. So you get back into that creative visual aspect of visual learning. So
yeah, as someone that's also self-taught, and I'm actually pretty new to Houdini, as you know, I don't have like a lot of experience here, like about like 2 years. So some of the concepts get really confusing, and some of them are just fine. But talking about like the visual part of it, especially when it comes to VEX, right now the kind of stuff that I struggle with don't really have like a visual aspect to them, like something like matrices or
right.
similar concepts. You can't really like, okay, I'll just add a line or add a vector, I can see the direction, so I get a basic idea what's going on there. But some of them aren't just really working that way. So that's the type of stuff I really struggle with.
Yeah, it's a struggle in that aspect because you are kind of beholden to the raw math of trying to understand those actual concepts and then trying to connect the dots as to how it relates in Houdini. I do know, like on the matrices side, like understanding RBD sims of any kind, those are
my
all
least favorite
coming out.
simulation.
Your least favorite. Yeah, that's probably going to be the, I don't want to say easiest, but the most relatable aspect for matrices is going to be on that is the outputs of all of the transformations that are happening for each piece. Because the bits that I am understanding so far is that it's all anchored to world 0. Every piece, like we see a chunk flying through the air and it's 2 units away from world 0. It's actually still anchored to world 0 as far as the math is concerned. So the rotational aspect is happening from there. It's not happening locally on the point itself, which has always caused me a lot of struggles trying to understand, because it's like, I want to rotate it around that actual point of where it's at. And the way the math is done in Houdini, it's still anchored.
You bring it to the 0, rotate it, and bring it back as much as as I understand.
And yeah, that's kind of been the simplification of trying to like, how do you make that work? It's exactly. You zero it out, bring it back, do the math, then put it back where it was. And it's like, okay, why is it got to be that complicated? Like, why can't I just rotate it locally? And
one of the things that I was struggling with was the rest position. If you remember from my course, I talked about rest quite a lot. And my solution when things are moving was to basically freeze it, calculate the rest on a separate branch, and then with a attribute wrangle, bring the rest as like a point attribute, which works right now, but there are scenarios where this doesn't really work, where you would really prefer it if you could calculate it on the actual movement itself. Like I tried working with one of the, I think the newer nodes, the one that handles transform. I don't remember which one was it. Was it transform by attribute or extract transform, which basically extracts the transform for you. And like that works fine if like you have something that's moving. Basically my problem was I have like a moving surface and I want to calculate the rest position for each one of these objects as they're moving. So I don't want to freeze everything and recalculate it because some of them have like weird movements and stuff like that. So I used extract transform, but again, it didn't work. My solution was using bringing it from the second stream, which is pretty simple. I think I'm kind of disappointed in myself for not coming to that conclusion earlier. But again, there are scenarios where that's not really what you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's a workaround from what I understand, like doing the second stream. I think just having it in the stream itself, I've been able to put it at the end of the chain, like just before the final output kind of a thing. But I mean, the concept is the same, like how you were saying, you're freeze framing. So that's all it is it's just saving the actual original location. So that's a huge thing to have, like with noise, because it took me a while to learn that too, was the rest position was vital for noise in rendering.
Yeah.
Because without that rest position, the noise was like sliding. So essentially your object was moving through the noise,
yeah.
versus the noise moving with it. And it was because
that's
your
a struggle.
Yeah, like the noise is based off of the position value. So if that value keeps changing, of course, your noise is going to keep changing. And so yeah, having that rest position frozen like that is
exactly. That was like the whole point. And one of the other ways that I found around this thing was to actually use KineFX for movement. So instead of actually like creating a procedural thing that's going around and changing every frame, basically have like the rest position there and then use KineFX to create that. My problem was basically, I don't know if you remember from the course, but the sponges, which I mean, again, I can just freeze them and transfer the thing back to them. It works fine. But as kind of an alternative, I worked with KineFX, and since I wanted to include that in the course as well, I went with that particular path. But like creating the movement with just a simple line and then bringing it back, I felt like that was a good solution if you don't want to, if you don't have like a complicated scene and just want to transfer a couple of objects, that kind of works there.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's an all-in-one solution to have it like with KineFX.
Yeah,
across the board, it's a lot simpler that way.
So speaking of KineFX, the rig wrangle. It's just a whole new world to me, and it's just confusing how to work with a rig wrangle, because as far as I understand, you're working with the transform matrix. You are not working with the actual position attributes. So
probably
the crazy stuff that you create with position-based functions don't really function there. You need
I think you can get away with it before rig wrangle.
Yeah,
but yeah, like after the rig wrangle, I think that's when it does the transformations in that particular part. So you do have to know a little bit of the math behind that, because I think that was one of the big benefits was being able to do it at SOP level and have control of those points, because you were able to animate those beforehand. And I think as an input skeleton, it works. But yeah, if you rig it up, then trying to move it afterward, I think that you have some issues with it that way, just because of that offset of the matrices.
Like the old way was actually, I think it was terrible. I feel like they kind of should just disregard that, because having the bones outside, yeah,
I am not a fan of object level working.
Yeah, me too.
Trying to build stuff at that level, because I almost treat like basically geometry, I treat it as a folder of sorts where I'm building everything inside of that at SOP level, and then I go back up to object level, and that's just basically my final results. I don't want to be working at that level for any raw build. And there's just some systems that are engineered that way. I noticed like Fur was like that.
Yeah, Fur is still like that if you use the shelf tools. If you actually build it up from scratch, it doesn't work that way. You don't need to do it. But then again, like you lose a lot of stuff that Fur offers by default, like the Vellum solver that's included in the object level. I feel like they did chain some stuff in Houdini 19, but I'm not sure. I actually haven't gone back to Fur.
The last time I touched it was for Mardini, and it was that was kind of like the first time I dove into the Fur tools, and I had to like learn them for that day to like do the contest entry. But yeah, it was all object level, and the Vellum was only accessible through that setup, and it was like I wasn't a fan of it. So
Yeah,
I can't imagine like looking at some of these Fur builds I see now in like these larger studio productions. It's like they can't be doing that all at object level, are they? I hope not.
I'm pretty sure they build it from scratch inside. You basically have access to all of it. I had to learn the Fur tools for one of my tutorials, which is basically these days how I learn things. I gotta set a goal. I say, okay, for the next tutorial, I'm gonna teach something. So then I have to go learn it, which kind of works for me, because I feel like the best way of learning something is teaching it. I mean, as long as you do have a pretty good understanding of it.
Yeah, well, it forces you to use it and stay active in it. So you start to learn some of the little quirks about it, which is great. You know, that's definitely a great way to learn.
Yeah. One of the only areas of Houdini which I've never touched is crowds. I feel like that's
Same
just
here. I've
something. Yeah.
actually, it's funny you say that because I've actually been reading up on crowds the last
Mhm.
2 nights, just because I've had interest in it and I'm curious as to the actual workflow for it.
Yeah, me
And
too.
some of the aspects I'm seeing, I'm not liking because they're kind of overcomplicated in some
Yeah.
respects. But at the same time, I want to focus primarily on the logic. It's
Yeah.
the particle logic that I want to kind of mess with, the fuzzy logic that they have.
Mhm.
And I was reading up on some of that. So I might dive into that in the near future just to kind of play with it and
Yeah.
see, because I'm really curious about that. I have this interest in the like neural networks and just
Mhm.
trying to engineer something more than just a kind of mathematical movement. I want something that has more life to it,
Mhm.
has a mind of its own, literally.
Yeah. I feel like it gets like super complicated when you introduce Vex to crowds, because I've seen some people do
Really.
that, and it's just mind blowing.
Yeah, there's a lot of attributes associated with it from what I've seen. But
Yeah, some of them I've actually never heard of them. Like I'm like, well, what's that? What's happening there? As you mentioned, I'm a huge fan of diving into geo nodes for doing
Mhm.
stuff. Like I don't like placing my DOP network on the OBJ level. I usually put it inside a geo node, which
Yeah.
actually contains like all the rest of the things I'm gonna wire to my DOP net. It kind of makes it easier for me rather than jumping inside another context. Like
Mhm.
even right now, I used to place my materials in the material network. In my workflow, I have like tabs up there, and one of them is just a material view. But even right now, I just place a material network inside my geo whenever I feel like it's getting complicated, because I like to have like
Okay.
everything inside the geo. It makes it kind of easier to get there, I feel like.
Yeah, I've done that a few times. I usually personally I try to avoid that,
Mhm.
but not that there's anything wrong with it whatsoever. It's just one of those like mindset separation things where it's like my materials are all located in one
Mhm.
spot kind of a thing. So I like that organizational aspect of
Yeah,
it.
I was
I
like
definitely make
that
sure that all of
until
my
4 weeks ago.
oh, really.
Yeah, I encountered a scene that had about like 200 shaders that even I wasn't responsible for them. That was basically the imported scene. So like I had like 200 materials which work with this one section of the scene, and then I have my own materials. And I think in the end, I ended up with like 500 different materials, and then it was just really complicated to navigate through all of them. So I just separated
Wow.
them inside material networks. That's basically why right now I believe in that workflow. It was just
I
easier.
can
Yeah.
see that. Yeah, I would say everything I've dealt with has been single shader
Mhm.
at the top level. So yeah, I guess if you are breaking it out, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of like having a lot of materials. Each one has their own network, and then they are complicated inside. But again, I'm a
Yeah.
huge fan of material builders, because
Yes.
you just contain everything inside it. You do the
Yeah.
dirty work
Each one's got
inside.
its own
Yeah,
little thing. Yeah.
the dirty work is inside. No one needs to see what's going on inside your shader.
Well, and it's also nice too, like because a lot of shaders can be
Yeah,
similar. So
yeah,
you
yeah,
just want to just copy paste, and
yeah,
just alt drag and click, and then you've got the whole thing built, and you swap out a node or texture
yeah.
or whatever.
To me, it's basically about just having access to the nodes that are going to work with this particular shader, because like with Material X that they just introduced, the nodes are crazy. I gotta say, like I'm super
Are they?
excited that they are working with Material X, and I can't wait for Material X to just take over the whole industry. But you have so many nodes now. When you type like noise in Houdini, you have like a lot of stuff. Material X noise. If you work with Redshift like me, you have Maxon noise. Then you have like the original Vex noises, and
Right.
the Vex noises don't work with Material X. Material X does not like them. Any of the functions that were originally built with Vex, yeah, Vex shaders. Any node that's related to Vex shaders don't work with Material X. So you have to use their own Material X nodes, MTLX, whatever after it. So it sort of helps with organizing, which is something that we've been talking about throughout this whole session. Organizing is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the Material X ones that I saw were just when I did that noise class, I saw them listed there, but I'm not a.
They're not
person,
great,
so
if I'm being honest. Like personally, I'm a huge fan of the Maxon noise because it's just so simple to operate. Yeah. Like
I was trying actually to replicate as many of those as I possibly could, and it's tricky to try to figure out which noises they used behind there. I'm actually working on one at the moment.
That's great. I'm really curious about it.
Like a tile noise that
the box noise, I think, or
it's not a box noise. It literally is daisy chaining. What is it using? It's using Verneuil, curl, and turbulent noise, daisy chained in a specific way, and it'll actually create a grid. And it's creating kind of like this tile noise. It has they're square-ish with kind of rounded off corners, but it kind of has a ripple pattern to it. So it kind of concentric squares within the square.
That's very interesting. I
And
would love to see that when
really
it's done.
Pattern, but
I would love to.
Doing it as a quick little teaser thing. I'll be putting it out on like Instagram as part of the school promo.
Awesome.
Kind of
Awesome. Yeah.
I'll probably have that in the next couple of days or so.
Cool. So replicating noises, especially from the Maxon noise, I feel like it just does quite a good job. You don't really need to layer Maxon noises, especially not like the normal way we layer noise inside Houdini. You just put a bunch of them next to each other and then maybe use another noise as a sort of mask. So your result, just no one can really decode it, which noise you use there, especially if you're not really just sticking to a couple of them. Like I have preferences when it comes to Redshift. I love Booyah and FBM, but then there are so many noises that you can just wire together. It's not technically correct to just instead of layering stuff, but I don't think you can actually layer Maxon noises the usual way. They don't really work directly with position. You can't really wire them after each other.
I think it's you can only use it like in a mask aspect, like you were stating. Like it's just the values being multiplied or added across the board from what I've seen.
It doesn't have a position output as far as I know. I know it has like a global scale for scaling it, but then you don't really have when you're working with Vex shaders, you have you need to bring your rest position if you're working, for example, with an anti-alias noise and you want to build it up from there, which I mean makes it easier to work with if you don't have to connect a rest position. But then at the same time, you really are missing that particular thing that you can't really layer them.
Losing that extra control of being able to stack them or mix and match them in a mathematical way versus just a visual kind of track mat kind of way.
At the moment, something that I'm planning on implementing in my workflow is baking my textures. So instead of doing this, I would like to create a high-res version, create a noise inside Houdini, and then just bake it out as a texture, and go with the low-res version and just bring the texture, which it's still working with the noise, but might give you more options instead of just sticking to the Maxon noise.
Yeah, you could probably, because you could feed that back in probably through tops as well. At that point, with it being a texture, and then you start mixing and matching with all of that.
Yeah, probably.
That's one thing I haven't messed with yet is taking. I had taught the whole Vex noise and VOP noise, but I didn't really explain about intermixing the two. Because you could do a Vex noise and then on top of that stack a VOP noise, and just stack everything. So you've got every single possible noise that Houdini has.
It's crazy.
Oh yeah, I know.
It's super crazy.
Just some interesting results.
That would be really interesting. I'd love to see something like that. Just circling back to Vex, I just wonder if there's anything else that we need to cover when it comes to understanding the programming mindset. I mean, I know we talked about the mathematics aspect. We talked about how to follow things visually or through text commenting stuff, which is really important. But
I think I mean it just understanding the general flow of programming it does take a top-down approach for the most part. When you're creating custom functions, like when you start getting into building basically a series of tasks that the code will do, you can package those up into a function. So all you have to do is call the function, kind of a thing. And that'll start messing with your visual order of how things are laid out. But outside of that, I've found like some other tricks in when I'm building code is, again, back to that simplification of breaking it down into steps. If I want to build, I don't even know, as an example, like what type of effect, say I want to display something or such, but putting down comments first. This was a trick I learned from another programmer. Instead of just typing out code, literally you're typing out comments, and the comments are basically each goal that you're trying to achieve, that you want to displace, that you want to move the position, you want to set the color based on said position or whatnot. You're describing what you want to accomplish first, and then underneath those comments, you start building in the code associated with that task. And sometimes that helps break it down, not only visually, but also programmatically, to where, like, okay, this particular task is only going to involve a loop, or it only needs a variable. That's all I need to put here. Then my next step is requesting certain information. So I would need to have that information before this point. So then you would find where it would fit within that stack and so forth. Sometimes that helps as a good starting point. You're kind of building out your blueprints, as it were, before you build the foundation of the house, and then you build the house. You just stack everything one by one. So you kind of have to go in with a game plan somewhat.
That sounds like a really good idea. I've actually never thought about it. I'm gonna
I've
start using
really
that.
Helpful. The comment part of it, yeah, because it's like, just start describing what you want to accomplish, and just turn those into actual comments. And again, try to simplify those statements into individual pieces. So you don't put a full description in one line, because the code's not going to work that way, because you're going to need to break that down. So, step 1, step 2, step 3, think incrementally for building it out. And that will help you break down what you need to build code-wise, versus trying to see it as this overarching, like, I have to do all of these things. What code do I need? Start with the simple stuff first. You're going to need variables. You're going to need to store information. You're going to need to create information. So, build accordingly.
And I'd say probably a lot of people might have a problem at this point saying that, well, we don't know the function that would be associated with what I want to do. But personally, something that I found is a lot of people have basically the same language of describing something. So just writing it down, as you mentioned, and then kind of finding the keyword and just searching for that should probably bring a function. I'd say especially for beginners, Houdini probably has the function that like we need to use. It's not really like you don't have to build it. Probably it's there. You just have to find it.
Yeah.
So
and I would say too, like in the documents, there is forget the exact URL on it, and I had that as part of my thing in the docs. Basically, yeah.
Vex functions page.
The Vex function page.
I just always hit F1 and then find it on the list. Yeah.
F1 and go to that URL within your docs, and you'll get this full list of functions. So that'll be a starting point, because you can type in here and say you want to set something. Well, then this will bring up at least the items that are related to setting attributes, or setting primitives, or setting whatever. And this will help you kind of narrow down, from that starting point.
Yeah, also the search button on the top right also is really helpful, because you might want to like search something inside the function that's not really the name. But I found that to be actually really good as well. You just search something that you might think will be there, and it kind of brings it up. And I found a lot of functions this way, because I just don't know what I'm looking for, and then I just type something and it brings it up. At least figure out a sort of naming that's there, and then I will just research that particular function and I find it.
Yeah, especially if you don't know the specific term that they're using, because Houdini does that sometimes. They pick a scientific term and you may not know that. So it's more about the functionality of what you want to do, and that'll help you kind of hone in on where it's at. I find also, just as a side note, of using the docs, I use it in a browser separately versus the F1, because I found sometimes the search in F1 doesn't always catch the individual text. That's just kind of stirring out like a title or a header that's within the docs. Doesn't always happen, but I've hit a few occasions where it just doesn't pick up on it. Whereas like if you do a Google search or whatnot, you'll get the actual individual text words will be picked up.
Yeah, I actually used to do that as well. I got into a habit of using F1 when we got the early access to Houdini 19, and since it wasn't actually available on the website, it was only available through F1. So I kind of got used to browsing it from there. But yeah, that's
it's convenient, definitely, with it being right there. Yeah.
Yeah, the best thing is you can actually just highlight your function and hit F1. As long as you know the function, it's really nice to just search it from there.
Yeah, and the other thing too, like when you're in Vex, when you start typing, as long as the first letter matches something, you'll see a pop-up that shows some available functions.
Yeah, and after you put down the bracket, you actually get the whole explanation as well. I just wish it would stay and it wouldn't go away when you start typing. Yeah.
Yeah, the little pop-ups, like you don't want to twitch your cursor at all. Once it pops up, it's like, don't touch it.
Yeah. But there are ways to bring it back, like removing the first bracket and then adding it again kind of brings it up. So that's at least a workaround. Yeah, talking about like programming overall, we have another option in Houdini, which is kind of getting old right now, but it is still there, Hscript. So in your workflow, which one?
Hscript, I honestly feel it's always going to be a part of it. They've been modifying it, I've noticed over the years, where they're kind of unifying some of the information. Like you used to be able to, what was it? It was like $PT or something was, access point, which they've since removed, like way back at 16 or 17 or something like that. Where you start using like the point function now, and you start using the other, like they're using actual functions at this point for a lot of the Hscript, other than some of the globals where you get like $F, $FF, $T for time and frame and functional frame, or fractional frame is the term behind it. But I don't see them going away at all. I just see them evolving over time, just because they are way too useful. I have found myself.
I think they're just beneath everything. So if they really want to change them, things will stop working.
Yeah, they're too deeply rooted, I think, at this point, because there's Chops, and Chops does like.
I really wish Houdini would start developing Chops more. It's just.
I wish I understood it. That's been one area I've been wanting to dive into. That has been this like black hole mystery, because nobody talks about it as far as like
no tutorials, nothing.
Like, it literally is from like the original era of like Prisms and Houdini and like the
I feel like after they separated Touch Designer from Houdini, they basically just put all these type of stuff in Touch Designer. They didn't really And Chops is just amazing. I would love to get into it. It has so many functions. I feel like, except the jiggle part, which everyone kind of knows how to do that, no one really talks about Chops, which is just sad.
Yeah, it's just, I've met a few users here and there that are like totally in love with it. Others that didn't even know it existed. Or like myself that knows it's there and just doesn't know it because I haven't actively dove into it to use it. Because I've found Hscript solutions that totally work in my situation. So I've been using, like sine and cosine. I've been using noise functions in there, as well as fit functions to do a lot of the animation that works in my particular case. I haven't had any crazy need for something super involved, like a handheld camera that looked physically handheld, but I could get away with simpler solutions that involve noises and
honestly, just
sine
a
and cosine
simple
functions.
noise to the camera at
Yeah.
like 90% of the time takes care of that. But at the end of the day, some of the chop solutions are just really interesting. Like I've always wondered about like
Yeah.
the audio section, because that's just a whole world and no one talks about it. No
Yeah.
one works with it. I've seen
It's a
like
weird
maybe
mystery.
2 or 3 people that actually use chops. Like Mark Fancher uses chops quite a
Okay.
lot. I've seen, at least as far as I've seen his work. That, and also the cops.
Mhm.
Houdini has, I feel like, just entirely
Well,
abandoned cops.
yeah, I think it's there because it just kind of
It
used
was.
to be there, but but yeah, it hasn't gotten love for a
I feel
long
like
time, and
cops
it
could
lacks a lot.
be amazing, and I'm just sad that we don't use Houdini for compositing, as you
I
get
would
so many
definitely
stuff.
dive into it more if it had, I don't know, some aspects of it, but the like the UI, I'm not too
The
keen
UI
on
is
some of the
bad.
parameter.
It's super
And
slow, which I don't understand
that
why.
too.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
just doesn't work that well. I don't like the fact that we have scopes and then scopes
Mhm.
don't really go together. Even if you put like an EXR file, I've really tried to do my compositing inside Houdini, and then you have like different scopes, which technically, basically, I feel like it should be okay. You have this scope, you have this scope, you should be able to multiply them together, add them together to get your scene, but you won't,
Right.
because they have different scopes. You need to rename the scope to C, for example, which is weird. I've never seen anyone use C color for something.
Yeah, they've kind of, yeah, across the board they've been using that.
Yeah.
CD, CS, CF, like all of the color, whatever it would be, color diffuse and so forth. But
Yeah, I feel like it could replace Substance Designer in terms of procedural texturing.
there is definitely possibilities there. I mean, given the procedural aspect of between PDG and the point level stuff, translating a lot of that stuff over in there, because you can read the SUP data or those attributes into COPS, and you can create like texture maps and stuff out of noises and whatnot. Like, yeah, the integration there could be so much better, and definitely optimized to be more efficient. That's for sure. But yeah, it definitely, I feel like they've abandoned it for the most part. Like, it definitely has not been a focus for quite some time. But there are some really awesome features in it, like optical flow of all things. Like having that data, you can make some really killer effects in like particle simulations and all of that stuff. Especially, there was an awesome animation that somebody used for fluid sim, where they took footage, the optical flow data from that footage, and basically drove a flip sim where water was like splashing around and all of that stuff based on
really
the movement
amazing
of the character. And it's beautiful looking stuff. But yeah, like just having access to that data. So I think at this point, it's kind of like this ghost town of sorts of random bits that still exist that are there, but very helpful individual tools to kind of like a weird attribute, like a old school kind of attribute system to like bring in this unique piece of data, like optical.
Like you can use your UV attribute inside COPS and just do crazy stuff, and then transfer it back to your geometry, which should be really fun and also easy. It shouldn't like be this complicated to put your whole workflow through so much.
Like I could see the concept of just even those two things. So optical flow and the UV data, using the two of those together, and inside of COPS, making your own data mosh kind of effect, because that's essentially what it is. It's just optical flow motion that's happening with the keyframes missing. So the information here is smearing across to the other information and so forth. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities for COPS, and I feel like it's just kind of been ignored. But who knows what the plan is? I
don't think they're really going to really.
Yeah, I've heard rumors about different things like chops possibly going away, which I hope is not true.
I really hope it's not true.
But it's again, it's another area that just doesn't have any love at all. And I think people have gotten used to not using it, but it's kind of like the self-perpetual thing. It's like nobody's using it because there's no information on how to use it. So, it's self-fulfilling.
Honestly, like one of the things I found recently in COPS is the Redshift post effects.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they are there. You literally have access to them. You don't need to render your post effects. You just put your image there, and the post effects node is. Let me actually share my screen. Bring it real quick.
I never even realized that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that.
How often I go in the COPS?
Let me bring it up. So yeah, like you put down at the COP2 network, and Redshift post effects are right here, and you can. Was it image?
I'm seeing your Google. Your
am I? Oh, I'm sharing my second. Give me.
Yeah. I saw Houdini for a second, then it went away.
Okay, right here.
There it goes. Yep, that's Houdini.
So yeah, you get like the PostFX, Redshift PostFX node right here, and it has all the functionality. Like you get everything. The lookup tables don't work for some reason. I don't know why, but bloom, flare, streak, they're all there. You can literally do all your PostFX after, and it's just so amazing
really
to be able to do this, and no one talks about. I've never seen anybody talk about this. Like you can literally, and it just sounds so convenient, and I don't know why no one talks about it. Like I can bring an image and just add it right here. I think I shouldn't have brought a 4K image. Why am I not seeing it? Okay, I'm seeing it. And yeah, you just get all the controls over it. You can work with exposure. Why isn't it working again? I have no idea, but it does work. Maybe they broke it in their recent update, but I actually did use it and it was working. I don't know why it's not working right now. Should I just go back and forth?
The checkbox right there. Enable color controls.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, good. So like, yeah, you get like exposure. Yeah, it's working. Okay, great. So yeah, you get like your bloom, everything, and it just makes it so simpler because you can actually bring your scope, different scopes, because up until this point we're used to just adding the post effects to the actual final version, but now you actually can just add diffuse everything together and then have an emission pass and only apply your bloom to your emission pass. So that way it just becomes such a smart thing to do. But then again, you need to extract all your different scopes, rename them to C for some reason. I still can't wrap my head around that. And then just merge them all together. But yeah, to me, that's just
a campaign to push them to do more stuff with us.
Yeah, every couple of weeks, I tweet something to SideFX saying, I need cops. Please bring me cops. But they never listen.
It would be nice if we could do, more in cops as far as like actual finishing, because that would be kind of nice.
I mean, honestly, the VOP system, the VOP generator, it's kind of confusing to me. Just all these attributes here, which like you won't really necessarily use a lot of them, and then you have like RGB and then color RGB for some reason.
Why split those then?
I don't know what it's actually doing. Like resolution, I understand that, but then you have like HSV here. You have your XY. Like there are so many things going on here, which feels like it's not really necessary. And then like splitting them, putting them back again into this weird thing, and like you have all your parameters and like these noises, which I think they don't exist.
There's a whole thing I have to figure out on that, because I had the same issue with the noises that are polar noises, and the assumption is it's related to volumes, but I
don't think they are. I don't know what they are. Maybe they are there for the where they were using Vex for shading. Maybe that's why they're there.
I think part of it was that initially, but like on VOP side, there's actual pyro noise that is there just geometry wise. And I think that was possibly related to like when you do the dual rest for adding noise to a volume after the fact as a post effect. But again, I haven't been able to find any useful information as to how to functionally get those things to work. Because the description for the pyro noise,
I think there's no help.
Yeah,
there's nothing.
because it says to connect it up
here.
to the diffuse. Yeah, so and it's been there since version 12, but it says that it'll actually connect to a unified noise to create a special parameter, and it's like, okay, and I've been unable to find this field operation thing in unified. So I don't know what I'm overlooking. But,
I crashed.
Yeah. And that is also Houdini.
Yeah. I've been getting so many crashes lately. I don't know why. I feel like they've kind of messed up some stuff in the new version.
On the latest?
Yeah,
version?
I'm on the latest production build. I don't use the daily builds because I feel like they have but like I'm getting weird problems with popnets. Just saving a pop network. I'm getting issues. I don't know why. Just copying a popnet. And it's specific. It tells me the problem is with an attribute wrangle inside the solver, which I have to email them.
I think that might be Redshift related, because I have an issue every time I do a cache.
I have that. I have that as well.
There's that delay of like it not popping up, but then it says
2 console messages. That's Redshift. I don't know why. I checked their forum and the Discord, and apparently, technically, the current version of Redshift is. I don't think it's not compatible with Houdini 19. It's still part of their like daily build, but some of them claim that it's fixed. Some people claim that it's not. I just feel like at some point, programs, softwares are just going to have these problems. I've just gotten used to just saying, okay.
It's a normal thing because everybody's moving at different paces. And I know NVIDIA came into the mix with an issue with a bug on their end that changed the whole, like the viewport wasn't showing anything. With like latest drivers.
I didn't upgrade, but I feel like, should I upgrade right now? Is it fixed? But I'm just worried.
When you have something that's functional, it's like you don't want to touch it.
Just like
it's like it works.
Working very poorly, but it's working.
I can at least deliver something.
I mean, honestly, right now, when you have clients, when you have projects that they have a due date, it's just a risk to change anything. I'm 2 versions behind the new release of Redshift. I would like to upgrade, but at the same time, it's working. So I'm not touching that.
I always, when I was in production doing client stuff, I was always in the mindset of 3 generations. So I was always like 3 generations behind on a lot of different things for that very reason. It was like the first gen was all beta. The second gen, they worked out some of the kinks, but it still wasn't quite there. They were still fixing stuff. But by the 3rd generation, it was pretty stable. So I kind of kept that mindset. I've kind of ignored that recently because I've had to. I've kind of been forced to like update certain things, which in turn snowballed. You know, if that updates, then this other thing has to update. And like I had no choice. But like even with Houdini, I'm still with the initial release. I'm with 19. I don't have the
I'm 455. I think you are with 383 probably.
383. I think is what it is.
Either 338 or 383. I'm not sure.
I think it's 383.
I'm with 455, and there are some bugs, but at the same time, some of the problems that I had are fixed. I feel like, what was it that wasn't functioning? Some of the nodes weren't functioning. I don't know what was going on there, but everything seems to be okay right now. But then again, I have the weird particle problems.
Like I think it's just a continual process. As they fix one thing, something else breaks, and it's an evolving piece of software. It really is. It's part
Yeah.
of our life.
Lately, it feels like Houdini is only focused on KineFX. It's like the thing that they're putting, at least I feel like 60% of the resources to developing KineFX, which I mean, it's very interesting to me. I haven't really gotten like really into it, but I'm trying to like use it on a daily basis. But at the same time, I feel like some of the different parts of Houdini is not getting the love that it deserves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they fluctuate based on like the outcry and demand, from the general public. Obviously, KineFX has a lot to be worked on. The Karma as well too.
Yeah,
But
Karma
that's
as
another
well.
one.
Yeah.
So
Karma,
there's
Solaris. I mean, a lot of
Solaris.
the things that they added recently are geared towards big companies.
Yes.
They're not like, honestly, I don't really see myself using Solaris at this point. I sometimes use it, but I feel like it's just.
There's going to be a point transition depending on how side effects goes, because it's always been film centric. That's been their primary demographic, the big studios and doing film effects and all of that stuff. It wasn't only until recently, and I say recently, like the last 5-6 years, that motion design and design in general was kind of starting to like dabble into and starting to adopt Houdini on a more regular basis. I think you can thank G-Monk for that. When he did all of the stuff for that one movie, I forget, it was a Tom Cruise movie where he was up in the clouds and all of that stuff. I forget the name of it, but he did a bunch of UI work for it. And that kind of was the first inkling of like, hey, Houdini can be used for motion graphics, kind of a thing. He kind of put that on the map, and that kind of started that cycle of C4D artists hopping over and trying to figure out what Houdini was all about. But yeah, like the company as a whole is definitely film centric, and that's where these systems are coming from. Solaris, the USD, all of these are built for major kind of large studio pipelines, kind of a thing. And then phasing out some of these other aspects, like Mantra supposedly is going to go away, and Karma will be the replacement for that at some point. Who knows how long that's going to be?
I don't think it's going to be in like 5 years, 6 years. Yeah.
No, exactly.
The Karma still lacks quite a lot of stuff.
Yes, it does.
It
There's
just
a lot of
can't really compete with Mantra. I'm a fan of Redshift, but which really can't compete with Mantra. But
well, and I think that's their goal too, because they want a CPU and GPU solution, and that's the goal behind Karma, is what they're trying to aim for on that. But yeah, it has a ways to go before it would be considered production ready by the actual productions.
They say it's.
They're saying production
it's
ready
not.
for the
it's
CPU,
really not.
It's not. I mean, for basic stuff.
I've been working as an indie artist and working with Karma for a while now, and it's not ready for indie project. It just keeps crashing. The UI is terrible, especially if you're not using it with Solaris. If you're using the actual ROP node that they recently added, the Karma node in ROPs, and it just keeps crashing. The settings won't change. You have to, if you want to reload the scene, you have to remove the node and add it again, which you lose everything you changed.
Yeah, I think they're going to hit a point where they're going to need to make a decision, because I've noticed a lot more designers adopting the app, a lot more people in general adopting the app. There's a lot of migration happening to Houdini right now. And they, being that they are film centric, a lot of their user base isn't. So we
have scientists, designers, motion designers,
exactly,
architects. I've seen some architects design stuff. Yeah.
It spans so many genres, which is really impressive, but makes it difficult to kind of appease everybody, especially from a workflow standard. Like the designers and all of that will have the closest partial workflow to like a film, studio kind of setup of sorts. It's not necessarily shot based per se, but there can be shots, but the breakdown is going to be, more similar than say a scientific analyst of whatever discovery they're trying to work on or something. But yeah, so trying to fill in those workflows like USD, that is very film centric.
Yeah,
That is
it is.
specifically meant for departments to be able to hand a project around from department to department and have it, still function. But
I mean,
I
USD
think that's going to be
is
an adjustment.
great. I feel like it's probably going to like take over the whole industry pretty soon, because
Yes,
the ability to be able to embed the materials in something, I feel like that's just the dream.
it's self-contained. It's one unit that can just move around and supposedly work, and that's how it should be across the board.
I feel like it's not really working right now. Sometimes there are some problems, and I mean,
Probably, yeah.
how much control you have when your material is working in Houdini, for example, with Material X, but then the other program that you're taking it to doesn't actually recognize Material X. So that just becomes its own problem.
Yeah, because there has to be full support from all DCCs at that point. They can't partially implement, part of it. But yeah,
I've heard Redshift trying to add Material X. I know Arnold recently added something. Apparently, they have Material X now. Redshift has it on the Trello page as something that at some point they're going to add, but they're right now working on OSL, which I mean brings us back to programming, kind of doing shaders with coding, and it's just something that I've never touched, and I have no idea how it works.
Different world.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stuff that I've seen on that, it does get back into that same kind of mindset, because it is programmatic, but in a very different way, because I don't know, because I haven't dealt with creating shaders with code before. I assume that you can still get into like comparative statements and loops when building stuff, because I'm assuming you can layer, obviously, when you're building a material. But yeah, in that world, I think it just boils down to the syntax of what specific functions, if there's a draw function, or if there's a get alpha function, or whatever it may be. It's going to be specific to that world. So you have to understand that world to begin with, to then adopt the code for it. And I think that's, when you go into like processing, if you've ever used processing, the app, again, that's all code centric, and it's got its own custom functions to do certain tasks. And that's where, even when you know coding in general, like I know variables, loops, comparative statements, and all of that, even when you know that stuff, you still have to like dig and research to understand what they're kind of requesting for their base format to make something. And it just takes a lot of effort of reading and dabbling and researching. It's not always a fun process, but having some foundation helps when you go from language to language. You just gotta readjust. I mean, it's no different than, you think about it like humans in general. We've got languages all around the world. You've got English, you've got, Arabic, you've got Chinese and Japanese and all that stuff. And there's various phrases that we'll use about, being hungry or wanting to eat or whatnot. These are common, things that we would say, but it's just written differently. It's just pronounced differently. Same concept with code. When you get the code languages, there's going to be similarities, but there's going to be a lot of differences, and it's just adjusting to those differences and acquiring what each thing means. It's the learning process, and it's not going to be fast, unfortunately, but you build upon it piece by piece. I still don't know any, like every aspect of all of the code and VEX and Python and all that stuff, but as I need something more complicated than what I'm currently using, I learn that little piece, add it to my repertoire, and build upon that over time. And after year after year after year of continually using stuff, you'll memorize things from repetition, and you'll forget things from not using them. There's plenty of things that I've done before that were advanced, and it's like, I have to look that up again. I have to refer back to a tutorial I made because I haven't used it since then, so it's just kind of funny.
Yeah, as someone that's learning a new language, I'm learning German, so I can really appreciate the metaphor, because it's literally like that. You get so confused when it comes to a new language.
It is. There's familiarities here and there, and then it's completely foreign, in other aspects. So it's a process. You have to just kind of, teach yourself to memorize certain things, and at a certain point, it becomes second nature, and it becomes part of the process. But the process itself is always going to be a process. So.
Amazing. I think on that note, we've covered everything, and we can finish our session. I definitely learned a lot of stuff today, a lot of things that I was always curious about, and I wanted to chat about it. So thank you so much for joining me today. It was amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome.
More than happy to talk shop. I love doing it.
Also, me too. I'm gonna actually turn this into a regular thing I do on my channel, because I just don't have the time to record more than one tutorial per month. So I kind of want to add more content to the channel. So anytime you were in the mood for chatting with me, I know I'm quite chatty, so
I have no problem with it at all. I don't get to talk to many people in the industry that often, especially nowadays since we're all remote. So it's kind of like, I talk to my wife and it's over her head half the time. She nods her head, keeps reading her phone, kind of a thing. So it's like, yeah, no, I get it. Talking tech, it's not everybody gets it. So.
Yeah, definitely. So anytime you were in the mood, feel free to hop on a call, and we'll record it for the community, because I feel like it would be really helpful for the community as well. All right, awesome.
I'm happy to do so.